how bad is the Liberal Party federal report on the election that they can't release it, and there's a potential legal action between the former leader and the party? Oh man, I always want to read them anyway when they lose, but now I really want to read it, but I want the uncut one.
Someone will leak it. You'll be okay.
Oh yeah, I don't know what on the earth I wouldn't do to get my hands on that report.
All those people listening in right now for opposition research.
Yeah. You have a copy of that report. We promise to read it out line for line.
Absolutely. We will promote your own internal agenda.
And I promise we will edit your voice so that no one will hear you. And you can give us your fresh hot takes.
This is a safe space.
Yeah, it's a safe space. Give us that report.
The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast, and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes each week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to the Patreon of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a Tuesday morning on the lands of the Gauls. Arrived in from Dublin into Paris last night and had an activist conference in Dublin, which was incredibly successful. Also, shout out to the Alice PR firm for bringing us out to Dublin, bringing Dunn Street out to Dublin for the activist conference. Really was successful. And shout out to all of the activists that were part of the program. A great week of campaigning and organising and teaching and learning and stuff. So I really appreciated that. And the hospitality as well. I've got a bit of a cold now, so I think I had far too many pints in the pub and may have picked up something along the way. So in Paris, but joining me on the line, it's our Mailbag episode, and joining me on the line from back home in Australia in Sydney, he is the Director for Campaigns and Strategy at Unions New South Wales, Todd Pinkerton. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Stephen.
I'm not going to wish you Happy New Year. I'm very much in the Curb Your Enthusiasm. Anything after the 3rd of January, no Happy New Years. I'm done.
No, it holds out to Australia Day, I'm told. Happy New Year.
Oh, right. Okay, very good. And she is the former Chief of Staff to Premier Daniel Andrews and now is a Managing Partner at FMRS Advisory. Lissie Ratcliff, welcome back to the show. And on behalf and from Todd, Happy New Year.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Stephen. I think in Europe it's till the 6th of January, isn't it? So either way, you're past your cutoff.
Yeah. Well and truly past my cutoff. Yes. Now, before we get into our mailbag episode, it's with great sadness that we have to acknowledge the passing of a friend and a colleague, Tim Pinkerton. Tim hailed from Adelaide and cut his teeth as a campaigner in the South Australian branch of the party and worked on a number of successful federal and state campaigns before going on to work for Senator Don Farrell. Tim came to Melbourne midway through the 2014 state election campaign and applied for a position with the Victorian Labor's field program, and it was hired as the organiser for the seat of Mulgrave, which was the seat of the then opposition leader Daniel Andrews, which was in a precarious situation at the time. I will say at the time, Tim, there was 2 jobs going. There was one for the field organiser, there was one for the regional field director, which was probably a higher position. And Tim wanted to get the RFD spot. And I don't think he was too pleased when we appointed him the field director, but we did because we were worried about Mulgrave. And Tim came across from Adelaide with an incredibly good reputation as a campaigner, as an organiser, and the stakes were too high. There could be a possibility in which we maybe just won state government but not get the leader elected, and we couldn't have that, so we needed to make sure that we did both. So we put Tim into the role as organiser in Mulgrave, But he was such a professional. Even though he was in very unfamiliar surroundings in Melbourne Southeast, he quickly got to work establishing relationships with various party members and branches and community leaders, and built a strong campaign and was successful in holding the seat for our then newly elected Premier. He went on to play an important role in the Premier's private office, focusing on the delivery of government in the infrastructure projects program, including the level crossing removal program. I'm sure Lissie will have a bit more to talk about that. And then he went on to move to Western Australia, where he was appointed the party secretary and campaign director, and orchestrated an historic landslide win for Labor in the West, a win that was so big that the UN election monitors had to come and investigate the result because they thought it was dubious. That's not true. I should make that last bit up. He was an incredibly talented, tactile, dedicated, hardworking Labor campaigner and a great friend to many across the country, and had an impact on not just the Labor Party, but our society in 3 states, but made friends right across the country because he was such an infectious, loving person. And myself, Jesse, and the socially democratic community of listeners wish to pass on our condolences to his wife, and also a fellow field alum in Victoria, Priya Brown, and their beautiful daughter, Charlotte, and his parents, his brother Chris and his sister Jo, and all of his close personal friends. Our prayers are with them at this time. And I'll pass to Todd, who knew him very well as well. Todd, any thoughts or reflections about our friend Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it's pretty hard to find words to describe, I guess, the sort of collective grief that the big Labor family and movement is experiencing at the moment with the passing of Tim. I mean, I've been watching all the tributes that have been pouring out and reading them all. You know, they're all spot on. The guy was just equal parts razor sharp intelligence, just ooze charisma, like the perfect combination of the two. And so much has been said about his strategic and campaign work. You know, I know of at least 3 election campaigns that secured governments for like a Labor governments that Tim was instrumental in. But, you know, I knew Tim best as a mate. I met him first working in South Australia. I slept on his couch for a month and a half working on a seat in South Australia at the state election, where we kind of honed our craft of door knocking by day and then enjoying the Adelaide Fringe Festival by night, you know, after the phone calls. Of
course. You
know, he was just one of the best of us that work in professional politics, but also just such a great friend to people. You know, I count myself very lucky to happen to be at the bar that night when he met Priya for the first time, and they obviously hit it off. And, you know, when he moved to Melbourne and was working with you guys, I used to go and stay in his place. My wife, I used to go and visit him and Priya, and, you know, he'd let us sleep in the spare room rather than the couch, which was nice. You know, but he just was one of those just great human beings. And, you know, all of the tributes that are happening right now about how he just lived his life so fully are just so true. There were going to be great things. Tim had already achieved great things, but there was only more great things that he could have achieved. And my heart just goes out so much to my good friend Priya and to their beautiful daughter Charlotte, as well as Tim's siblings and his family. I can't imagine their grief, and I just feel so horror about the whole situation. You know, the whole party and the whole movement. You know, it's that collective grief that we're all experiencing. You know, it's hard to imagine what life will be like, you know, without Tim, what the party's life will be like without Tim in it. So, you know, heavy days ahead.
Thanks, Todd. Lissie.
Yeah, I think I want to second all of that. And I think I want to try and get through this in one piece would be good, given you both managed it. But I think maybe if I can, for old time's sake, maybe on behalf of everyone in VicGov who worked with Tim, whether that was in PPO or MTIA or everybody else. But I think, you know, one of the things I'd say is government is hard on its best day, you know, never mind all the many others, and as kind of sprawling institutions, have a tendency towards just inertia. And if you're going to be effective and if you're going to do big things, then governments need people with like really serious energy. And Tim was just one of those people, like he always walked like he was in a hurry, and he was always worried about, all kinds of stuff, big things, little things, and you could always see his brain going a million miles an hour while he kind of, charged down the corridor towards you. But all that energy translated into just this kind of phenomenal, drive to just get stuff done and make change. And I think he brought his values to work every day. Sorry.
Take time.
And he knew and he never forgot that, Labor governments have a responsibility to deliver for the people who rely on us for a better life. And he ran hard at that in every job that he ever had, in the party or in a government, and when he was a public servant still. And I think he's one of those people who just fundamentally understood that policy and politics and comms, like they all go together and you need all of them all the time. And he was probably even rarer in the sense that he was good at all of them, like better than good. And, like that kind of brilliance paired with impatience, which he had plenty of as well. It isn't always easy to like be around or to work with. And there are definitely days where he drove me crazy, and I have no doubt that I disappointed him on other ones. But I loved him and I loved working with him, and I think that's true of so many people. He made us in Victoria a better government. There's not many people who are so phenomenally talented that you change the whole structure of the Premier's office and build a whole new team around them that hasn't existed before, just to kind of make sure you get the maximum benefit of all the things they can do. But that's what we did with Tim. We built a whole infrastructure team around him. And, we'll never know what else he might have been able to do if he'd had more time, but you can look pretty much anywhere around Greater Melbourne and you'll find something that he helped build. And I think that's a pretty amazing legacy. And I hope that that's something that when Charlotte's older and maybe she comes over here to visit, Priya can bring her and say, these are some of the things that your dad helped make real and that had a real and will for decades have this huge impact on literally millions of people. So it's kind of hard to come up with all the words that I think we all want, but yeah. We were better for having had him in the party and in the movement and the governments that he was a part of, and we'll miss him a lot. And I absolutely did not get through that in one piece.
Lissie and Todd, I really appreciate both you sharing your reflections on Tim. And as you both said, there's been a lot of wonderful statements online about Tim's life, and I just thought it was important for it was terrible timing, but both the fact that you both were coming on the show this week and you knew him both incredibly well, that it would be remiss of us not to do that. So we certainly appreciate you sharing those thoughts. So it's our mailbag episode, and we have lots of wonderful questions from our Patreon listeners. If you ever want to send in questions for a mailbag episode, you should subscribe to Patreon. So these are the questions that we've received this month from our wonderful, dedicated, loyal listeners to Socially Democratic. And the first couple I'm going to bundle together because they're very much in the federal politics sphere. And The first one is from Jerry. Jerry, thank you for your question. It says, not much love for federal Labor on this pro-Labor podcast, so please lay out your favourite things the Federal Labor Party has done. And the other one is from Luca, which is this was discussed on a previous podcast, but what do you think is the overall message or endpoint for federal Labor? If I don't know it, then the general public would have no idea. This could just be me, but I feel as if the government are being reactive instead of proactive, merely managing government instead of putting forward a bold reform. The feds have passed some great legislation, but the messaging is lacking, in my opinion. And then Dean Winston has also asked, adding on to the not much love for federal Labor. All right, we get the point. I would like to it would be great to get an in-depth discussion on what federal Labor has done and what greater ambition that they could build towards. So far things seem to point towards universal childcare and possibly tax reform for equality. So there's sort of three kind of questions there that are related to federal Labor, and some of our listeners may feel like they could probably do more, be a bit more proactive than others feel like that they are doing amazing things, and they're demanding the three of us outline what they are. I will say, start to your question, Jerry, not much love on this pro-Labor podcast. Yes, this 100% is a pro-Labor podcast. There's no doubt about that. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to end up being the former Minister for Information in the Ba'athist Party for Saddam Hussein during the Iraq War, where he's standing in front of, Americans taking down the statue of Saddam Hussein, saying, we're in complete control of our government, everything in Iraq is fine. I don't want to get that biased. And I think from time to time we have been, certainly myself and maybe David Feeney has been a little bit critical of federal Labor. So that's the balance we're trying to strike. Not an easy thing. We don't want to be shitting on our comrades in Canberra, but we also want to kind of call a spade from time to time. So if you think that we're not much love, well, here's your opportunity. I'll throw it to maybe Lissie to start off with. What do you think federal Labor has done well in their time since being in government?
Look, I think they've done a bunch of things well since they've been in government, and it's like maybe picking up the point from your question is it's very easy to let perfect be the enemy of good, and I don't think it's a bad thing that, we as Labor members always want more from our governments. Like that's kind of as it should be, right? And we should always aim for more ambition. But they have done a lot of good things, and this is maybe not a super original answer, but I'm pretty big about some of the stuff they're doing in health. I think that's super important, and admittedly I maybe come to that from the sort of state government perspective of having lived through a very long set of Tory governments that didn't do anything or didn't do anything good in health, and now we've got a federal Labor government that's doing urgent care clinics and massive increases in bulk billing. I think capping PBS medicines at $25 a hit is you look at some other places around the world, that's the kind of thing that is not even dreamt of. So they've got a big agenda in health. Again, maybe with my state government hat on, I'd say we always want there to be more, and there's obviously a national health agreement that's still to be landed between the Commonwealth and all the states and territories, so there's no doubt more to come. But I think they deserve credit for the work that they've done already that's been delivered in that space, and there's more to come. They've made it has made a genuine difference to Australians that there is a federal Labor government in charge of health policy in this country.
I think so. Todd, what's your reflections on the government so far?
Well, I'll start with my favourite policy because I feel like that's the low-hanging fruit. Now, I did do some sort of check of this in my own household, and my wife asked me to say the HEX reduction is probably the best thing, mainly because it's significantly improved my overgrown HEX debt from too many university courses and a few discontinued fails. But I'm going to go with something else that I think is a policy that has not gotten enough coverage, which is the paid placements program. So forever, students who wanted to take on education, health, and in particular social work and a variety of other roles had to do unpaid placements and basically go and work somewhere for free for like 13 weeks. And I've had some lived experience of managing and working with some social work students who've done placements here at Unions New South Wales. There was a community campaign, there was a student campaign, and Unions joined a part of it. And Jason Clare managed to secure funding for us now to have a sort of means-tested approach. Now, it's not everything for this, but it's now funding for students to be on a livable wage while they undertake these placements. Like, it's Labor to its bootstraps because it's a policy that's all about going to the people most in need, who there are going to be literally every year thousands of working class kids who can take on a profession in health, education, and social work, who no longer have to choose between whether they give up their casual or part-time retail job while they're, undertaking this unpaid work. So they're getting paid for it. So I think that's just a brilliant policy that's not getting enough coverage, but it's one of those ones that like it'll become institutional over time. Like there will be generations of future nurses, of teachers, of health workers, of social workers who will always be able to look out about that time the Labor government had their back for the 13 weeks they want to get real hands-on experience in this profession. So that, to me, that's like probably one of the things I'm most favourite. That and a significant reduction on my HECS debt, those two things have been pretty solid.
I'd also add to maybe not in this current term, but in the last term, and Todd, you can fact check me on this one since you work in the union movement. But the union seemed pretty pleased with Tony Burke and his performance in his portfolio in dealing with industrial workplace relations. When I was traveling around the country, I was, a lot of union officials were going, they weren't saying we're basically getting everything that we want, but we're getting more than we would normally expect, and that they were pleased, and that there was an open door policy with Tony Burke's office, having an opportunity to talk to him and actually work through stuff. And it was quite a functional relationship between the movement and the government. I mean, it's not something that sort of was talked about in the last term, in a proactive going out there and doing media kind of way, but certainly within sort of inside the beltway of the Labor movement, it was something that went down quite well and probably didn't get enough praise, because if we talk about being a Labor government, primarily our number one job is to look after working people, and we didn't talk about that a lot, and I wondered why, but I thought that was quite a positive thing that the government has certainly done since taking office.
Yeah, I mean, it was a belter first term with respect to industrial relations reform, the closing the loopholes legislation, and it's not just same job, same pay, for example, was a huge win in terms of effectively removing the business model of undercutting your existing employers undercutting their existing workforces by just bringing people in on labour hire. That same job, same pay provisions are awarding $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 pay rises to workers who are being exploited. Also broadly across the industrial relations framework, the domestic and family violence leave, that's undoubtedly saving people's lives, like people having access to paid leave to go and escape dangerous situations. When you're trying to escape a dangerous situation for fear of your life or your family's life, your children's life, whether or not you have enough annual and sick leave stacked up should be the last thing of your concern, and this government fixed that. Empowering the Fair Work Commission to make pay decisions, backing in minimum wage orders, the work they've done on penalty rates. They've done a tremendous job. And you're right, like if you talk about maybe the reason doesn't get enough airplay is it's sort of maybe seen as a given, like a Labor government should be doing things that are really in the interests of working people in collective action. And maybe it's a bit of a given. And so where's your Medicare 2.0 policy, or you're floating the dollar the second time, some big hallmark Labor reforms. But I think in that last election, there's been opportunities. The government's, because of its great track record on the IR stuff, has been able to frame up elections that effectively Labor is for you getting paid more money and the Libs are for you taking a pay cut. And that's great campaign space that you want to be in the coming election. So I do think that's been one that the government's done an excellent job on. No queries about. That being said, there's always more work to be done in industrial relations. There's always more things that can be done in the interest of working people. So watch this space. The national conference is coming, so there'll be more motions, I'm sure.
Yeah, that was spoken like a true trade union official there going, but more can be done, though. I just don't want to get too carried away.
No,
talk about too much.
You get everything you want in a negotiation, you didn't ask for enough. That's the...
Yeah. Exactly. But I guess Luca's question there was kind of hypothesizing about, is the government being too reactive instead of being proactive, merely managing government instead of putting forward a bold reform. I mean, what do you guys think about that as a critique? Is there a bold initiative or bold reforms, but they're just not communicating it? Is it a comms problem, or do you actually think it begins with the fact that they may not have a clearly defined agenda? And I said this at the end of last year, I think, maybe on the Feeney Files. I think it might have been the last or second last episode of the year. I was like going, okay, we're 6 months, 6 or 7 months has gone since the election. This feels eerily similar to the previous election where we had a win, we had this honeymoon. Not a lot of things were coming out from the government in terms of a clear agenda, like this is our purpose and this is our plan going forward for the next 3 years, and this is what we are going to do. And I was sort of hypothesizing going, this feels like this is happening again. Like we're 6 months in and I don't know exactly what the agenda is for the government. And I said, I'm kind of hoping that over the summer break that those folks in Canberra can get together and go, right, when we come back out in January or February when the kids go back to school, that they can outline exactly what their agenda will be. That hasn't come out thus far. To be fair, the events in Bondi obviously would have put a spanner in the works in respect to doing that. But I'm hoping that we see something come out of the government in the next sort of 2 or 3 weeks. Well, now that they're back at Parliament this week, that they can do that. I don't know. I mean, I'll go to you Lissie, first. Do you expect a government to be very clear in terms of what its agenda will be for this term? Or are we asking too much?
No, I mean, yes. I mean, I think if you had the Prime Minister here, I think his senior people here, I think they'd say their agenda is clear and that they're focusing on, kind of bread and butter issues like health and, education and training and childcare, and that they've got runs on the board in all of those places, and there's more of the agenda that they took to the election that's still to be delivered, and all of that is true. I think probably the one that, maybe we've maybe overlooked a little bit is probably the social media reforms. And I'll happily put my hand up and say, I was relatively skeptical about that when they announced it. I'm probably not the target market for it. I'm neither under 16 nor do I have kids, but I think there's no doubt that is, if you're looking at, big, bold reform ideas, well, no one else in the world has done that, and we have. And, I was just in the UK last week and, all sides of politics over there are talking about the reforms that the Albanese government has done and what that looks like in their context. So I think, I was skeptical about it, whether, how it would be made to work. But the reality is, and, it's not perfect, and Annika Wells and others have been really clear about this. It's not perfect and it's going to take a lot of work, but there are 5 million fewer, social media accounts belonging to kids in this country now than there were, 6 weeks ago or whatever it is. So, I think that policy's still got a long way to go in terms of its rollout and measuring its impact and all that kind of thing. But, that's a big swing that they took. It was a hard thing to do. It had a lot of opposition from the big, social media companies. And, but, at initial first glance, it looks like it's working and it'll have an impact. And I think you'll see other countries, follow in its footsteps. So do we want more of those big, bold ideas? Yeah, of course we do. But I think I don't think it is fair to say that they haven't had.
So you're absolutely right, Lissie, about the social media policy. That's another huge one, huge gamble, world leading. I don't know a parent with young kids, and increasingly my friendship group having children who are given a lot of safety and security from knowing that policy is in place. I would think that the government's message, though, the thing I think is the driving message of the government, it's a message for voters, but it's not a message for the party faithful. And it is that you can trust Labor. I think at its core, what Albo is trying to convey is this isn't necessarily a bells and whistles Labor government that will scare you or shock you. It's one that's very comfortable. Like, it's one that when you hear from the government, it's because it's getting on with the job. It's not, you're not hearing from us because we've picked huge fights with stakeholders, or we're taking on, like, they've been very selective in the fights they've taken. I think, and I was reflecting on the quarterly essay and your podcast episode with Sean Kelly, Stephen, which I was really listening to the other day, because I really think that he kind of nailed this answer, right? This sense that Albo really wants to present the government in the sort of the centre and to the centre left, and really push off the Greens and the Conservatives off into their own respective corners, and say, if you want pure ideological tactics only, desperate for the limelight politics, you can vote for one of those two fringe parties. But if you want actually just people who are going to solve your problems, who are just going to be sober, careful, steady hand at the till style, that's what a Labor government is now. I think that's the message he's trying to drive home, and it's somewhat subliminal. Like, it's not something he says, I think, overtly. Sometimes there's a bit of that. It's not particularly exciting, but it is one that does the voters, I think, are comfortable. Like, I think if you look around the world, at all the chaos and all the insecurity and the sort of the instability of governments, there's a lot to be said for the way Albo kind of handles the government and the way he's tried to present it. And I think there's a lot of comfort and a lot of security in that. And I think that probably is the message that the government wants to send. It's not an overt message, but it's definitely the subliminal message of everything that they do.
I mean, if the takeout that they're looking for from voters, like, I agree with you, Todd, like, it's not the message for the party faithful necessarily, nor is it ever going to be enough to probably satisfy all of us. But if the takeaway, like, feeling, because that's all, in the end, when you have voters walking into a polling booth, they're not going to have the policy detail in their heads. You kind of want them ideally to have a feeling about which way they're going. If the government has made life just a bit easier, then often, like, that's going to be enough. And it kind of feels like that's, whether it's making things, cheaper, so whether it's your university fees, or it's childcare subsidies, or it's free TAFE, or it's, you can go to a GP without it costing you a fortune. Like, those things all make life a bit easier. They don't fix everything. They don't make everything, everything straightforward and easy, but it's a bit easier. And if that's what the government can get to for the majority of Australians, then yeah, I agree with you. I reckon they'll probably tick that as a success.
Yeah, I mean, Todd, your response is super interesting, because I was reflecting on that the other day. I was thinking about other governments that have been successful. What has been the sort of the central narrative that ties together the work that they're doing? The Andrews government was kind of like getting shit done or getting on with it, and we can point to all of these different examples of it. And I was thinking about this because I had to go on Irish national radio when I was in Dublin the other day. And with a guy called Pat Kennedy, who's this highly respected Irish journalist, and everyone was saying, Stephen, don't fuck this up. And I was like, well, I don't want to fuck this up. Yeah. So Jesse is giving media training as the days leading up. So I had to start to, I was thinking, because they wanted to talk to me about anti-Semitism and the response after Bondi. And I was like, oh my God. And so I was thinking a lot about that and thinking about the Albanese government and its approach to both things that are proactive and reactive. What I was going to say, if I didn't get this question in the end, thank God, but if I did get this question, I was going to say, look, the Albanese government, and in particular the Prime Minister, is a very thoughtful, caring, concerned, measured, cautious type of leader that really wants to weigh up all of the information that he gets before he and his government make a decision, as opposed to just flying off the handle. And I think it goes to the point that you're saying there as well, about how they are approaching the work they're doing. There's so much chaos in the world, but you can be always assured that this Australian Labor government is going to do things differently, and it's going to be we're just trying to make your lives a little bit easier, and the way that we're going to deliver it is in a way that is very thoughtful and considered and not rushed. Now, my criticism of that is that sometimes it's probably a little bit too much caution. I think that where they've got to now, for example, if we use the example of the response to Bondi with the Royal Commission, for example, it took them a month to get there, but I think they probably knew they could have done it in the first week. And I often sometimes think that, speed can be an efficient way of showing that you are in charge and you are decisive. Daniel Andrews was certainly one of those leaders, and I think Chris Minns has shown that he's that kind of leader as well. Whereas Albo's not like that. He is very measured, and I think sometimes in that vacuum, people can get frustrated, and I think we saw that with Bondi. And there's other examples as well. The stage 3 tax cuts. Oh man, the whole country was like, dude, this is a lay down misere. You've had so many off ramps on this one, like with inflation. It's clear. Economists are saying this is clearly inflationary policy. You shouldn't do this. And Albanese was like, no, I can't be seen to be a flip flopper. So, so like sometimes I just think that they're a little bit too cautious to the point of actually put themselves in a bit of a bind. So I guess striking that balance is something where I kind of want to see a change from the government going forward and into this next term. I don't know, Todd, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't disagree with the thesis that maybe the government is probably too hard on itself, right? It probably thinks in some regards that it can't make these decisive moves. It's got a whomping majority. The opposition's in a pretty dire state. They don't know where they are on any policy front at all. I was reflecting on another one of the comments from your previous podcast, the podcast with Sean Kelly, about some of those big decisions from the Prime Minister happen in the second year. It's a year to sort of consolidate post the election. There's a year of getting things done, and then there's a year of working on the re-elect. Right? I wonder whether there's a bit of a cadence in the way that we think, and maybe we'll see some big things coming forward. If the government wanted to take a swing on a few things, now's kind of the opportunity with the seat majority that it's got. That being said, I also think that the Prime Minister is also one of those people who's going to be very reluctant to look at that last election result and think that there is they have a very, very support what's the way we described it, right? The support is wide, it's not necessarily deep. And so there's a question there about whether he was to take a big swing on a policy that was a little bit divisive. He had to really bring the country with him. To what extent would that sort of where our primary vote is and where preferences are, and then the way the last couple of weeks have gone, is that the right call? And I think maybe the most important thing in Anthony's mind, and I don't know him personally at all, and the people I know who have worked with him say he's an excellent tactical and strategic leader in this respect and a good Prime Minister. I think he feels a lot of pressure on his mind not to lose an election. And I think that's a bit of a weird one, but in his mind, the longer Labor is in government, the better things will be for working people, and it'll stop the Tories from doing terrible things. And so his number one priority is keeping the Tories out. Fighting Tories has always been his slogan. I think at its heart, a lot of people in the Labor movement and the Labor Party would say, well, the point of government is to get your hands on the levers of power and do some great things. But I think he does. I think the Prime Minister doesn't underestimate just how important it is to just be in power. Because what you can do day to day, that kind of the bread and butter stuff, the stuff that isn't done on press releases, the small decisions being made. And when he does make big changes, he wants to be in power long enough that they become part of the social fabric, so they're almost untouchable by future Conservative governments in getting rid of.
Yeah, no, I find that fascinating because I think that doing just enough is why we have a 33% primary vote. And I think that adding bricks on top of that where you do not even major reforms, but things that are so substantial that people look around and go, I can actually see why Labor is good, is how you get to 40. And having a clear agenda about what you want to achieve and communicating that. And I think and I know that everyone thinks this podcast is a Daniel Andrews Homer podcast, but I'll draw Lissie in on this as well. And I think Chris Minns is going to have the same thing. I think Chris is going to have a thumping win at the next election because people are going, he's a leader. I respect him. He makes decisions that I don't always agree with, but I respect him, and he's actually got a clear plan for the state of New South Wales. And I think Daniel had that. That's why we won with thumping majorities, because he often made, Lissie, jump in here. He often made decisions that pissed off people, but only pissed off about 30% of the electorate, because the other 70 loved it. And I think there wasn't caution in Daniel's approach, but Lissie, what the styles of leadership we're talking about here is different. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, look, they are different, and they're obviously different people and leading different governments, and probably worth pointing out in different times as well. Like, it's 2026 now, and Daniel hasn't been in office for two and a bit years, and times change fast. But I mean, yeah, what you're talking about is, and that's something that we did a lot, is kind of conflict as a communication strategy as much as anything else. Like if you pick the fights carefully, but if no one's on the other side of it, then there's no noise, and if there's no noise, nobody notices. And I do think that's maybe federal Labor is suffering a little bit from that, because and maybe the IR. Stuff that you were going through before, Todd, is a little bit in that space as well. Like, it's not that there's been no opposition to any of those things, but there hasn't been kind of a screaming front pages for 6 months about, most of these IR things. So absent the conflict, probably a lot of people haven't noticed what is a whole bunch of really good actual policy and good reform, which is actually having an impact on people's day-to-day lives, whether they notice all of that or know about it, maybe not. I don't think look, there's no doubt you can be successful without picking fights and choosing conflict positions on things. Like the federal government is evidence of that. They've won 2 elections without really doing much of it. I do think, though, you talk, like Stephen, you talked before about, the Prime Minister and the federal government kind of managing their way through things and taking a lot of time to consider stuff. And I think when you're the ones in control of the agenda, that can be fine because you're dictating the pace and the topic and the decision points and, and the progress, I guess. But where that can get a little unstuck and that can become difficult is when things come, from out of nowhere about which you have no control, and suddenly you get derailed. And then, managing your way through some of those things is harder, because some of those things, I think, require a more instinctive, sometimes emotional response. And I think, I'll give Chris Minns great credit where it's due. I think that's the way he's responded in the last, what's it been now, 4 or 5 weeks, and really kind of hasn't put a foot wrong. So there's a balance to be struck. And yeah, for my money, I'd rather they were picking a bit more of it as well. I think there's a good quote that John McTiernan had in one of his op-eds the other day that he finished from a former UK Labor Prime Minister. The Labor Party is a crusade or it is nothing, which I'll fully confess is a bit more aligned to probably my worldview of how the party should be, what it's for and what we're about, and what the point of a government that's a Labor government is. But yeah, whether you should be dialing it up to 100 all the time, arguable.
And I think the social media stuff is probably a good example of that. It's contentious and it's got traction. And it's very popular, and as you said, and everyone knows about it. When we're, people in the UK were talking about it, people in Ireland were talking about it. Like, people around the world, certainly the Western speaking world, know about this policy.
It's messy too. It just implementation wise, like how we're going to stop, and people will say every time there's a small failure of the policy that the whole thing is bringing down. But when you're doing world leading change, some of the just it's not going to be perfect.
Yeah, when you go first, you got to figure it out as you go along.
If every kid who finds their way onto social media, there's 20 that won't, who are going to be safer as a result of it. So,
great question. Thank you to who was it? We got Deck, Luca, and Jerry. All right, let's turn to a question from Andrew, and it's for Comrade Ratcliff. What's your take on how the current Victorian government is going? Maybe with a good versus suboptimal thing. Comrade Ratcliff, how do you think the Victorian government's going?
Well, I think the Victorian government is gearing up for an election, because what are we now? We're 10 months away, give or take. So it's really the business end of the term. So I think everybody's probably sleeping less and stressing more, as is usually the way these things go. I think, look, obviously we're in the middle of a fire season, and it came early to arguably to Victoria this year, which is always really difficult. I think the government's managed to get, obviously through the initial response bit, which is usually kind of short, intense, really difficult, and people lost a lot of property and there's been a lot of damage. But then there's the recovery bit, which is long and hard and just grinding. And I think they've managed to get the things they need to out the door fast so that people have got the support there. But they're going to have to kind of keep an eye on that while also, running the government and everything else they need to do, and then getting ready for the election. So that it becomes that once you've got a natural disaster to grapple with, you kind of become a 3-track operation, really. So I think they've got that. I think for them, I think health will be a big focus at the start of the year. They've just opened the new Frankston Hospital. They broke ground on the Austin Hospital up in Ivanhoe today. The Footscray Hospital out in the western suburbs will be opening in a couple of weeks. Like, health will be a big part of early part of this year. And I think, obviously it's an election year. That means they're going to need to put out some new things on the table. And there's no doubt, like the government's going for another term. So that's always, it gets harder the longer you're in. But I think work from home was the standout policy last year. It got the biggest cut through. Everybody talked like that was one of those things. There was a conflict point. So it cut through. People know about it. People are very supportive of it. That'll be back. They've been out doing consultation about the implementation for that. That'll come back, I assume pretty early this year. So that'll be another decision point for the Liberal Party. Can they bring themselves to support something which is pro-worker? I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably not. But I think that's a really popular thing that Jacinta Allen and the government have done, and hopefully they've got more of those kinds of things coming over the next 9-10 months as they head into November. But it'll be a hard fight. I mean, every election is. They've got a big majority, which I think is probably worth noting. But here and in other states, like having a huge majority, despite the current state of the federal government, like that's actually not normal. Like closer elections are actually something that happens much more often. But I think it'll be a big contest. It's going to be a hard year. But government should be hard. That's kind of the point.
And the second question from Andrew is for you, Todd, also referred to you as Comrade Pinkerton. Are unions reaching out to internet personalities to engage in content like Friendly Geordies as an example to produce current issue explainers and basic knowledge of Australian unions and just how they work, and sort of pushing back on a lot of the anti-union content that we're getting out there? And also say good work, comrades, to both of you. So Todd, what's happening?
Thank you, Conrad Andrew, for the question. Look, yes, the short answer is yes, but I guess what I'd probably want to talk about a little bit more is the sort of the engagement more broadly with sort of what we call like sponsored content or SponCon, and it's the engagement with influencers, in the sort of explosion in, a group of people with podcast mics or a video camera making videos or getting together and talking about things. In a lot of ways, the media ecosystem has developed all of these new actors or these new if you're, in a lot of intents and purposes, you're always going to treat them a little bit like earned media in terms of journalists, like people that you go and you brief and you work on and you talk to and you try to get them to produce, you're trying to create the conditions by which they will produce content that is in your strategic interest from a campaign perspective. Now, unions have done some work. I know, for example, unions have done some work with Friendly Geordies. I've done some work in the past with some of his content. There's a few other influencers, podcasters out there. If Andrew's interested in the space, there's a video a couple of years ago Unions New South Wales sponsored with, and I'll forget the name of this influencer, but I think it's like Yo-Yo Boy or something like that, to talk about the hardship that food delivery drivers and riders do. And so these blokes decided that they would do a full day's work on Uber Eats on foot rather than using a car or a line bike or anything, and just show how ridiculous these jobs are and how little they're paid. So there is some really good, interesting content that has been produced by unions. I know the AMW's done a series of great stuff about local content. Yes, there should be more of it. I guess it's one of the things about the prioritization, is what unions should be putting their resources in sort of general pro-union educational pieces, or 90% of the work that the union movement is done is tied up in the everyday bargaining, wages, disputes, doing individual cases, workplace grievances, not to mention the sort of policy outfit. So yeah, absolutely. Unions are doing some of it. They could do a lot more of it, but there have been some really good lights. And, not to reveal too much, but some of this is planned from the union movement in the lead up, particularly around election times. And I think you'll see a lot of it around some of the upcoming state elections. And in particular, now we'll have some stuff coming out for the New South Wales election.
There's a guy that the Dunn Street United States Engagement Mission meets with when we're in New York, and he's a friend of ours. Actually, Lissie and I met when we went to the States in 2013. That's the first time we came across him. He was just sort of coming out of Obama land, but now runs his own shop that essentially connects online influencers that have a social conscience, political kind of lens to their content, and connects them with folks that want to elevate their campaign narrative. So it could be a trade or a labour union. It could be a Democratic politician. It could be a community or an NGO or a community organisation that wants to impact change and obviously build the awareness and then drive people to obviously sign up and get involved in their campaigns. And so his outfit actually connects all of these influencers, of which there are so many in the United States, and there probably are a lot in Australia as well. But he's actually saying, well, actually, your work would actually fit very well with this particular trade union. Like maybe there's a Latino influencer / comedian, and then he's matched them with the Culinary Workers Union in Las Vegas, because obviously the majority of those workers are from Latino background, and so there's a perfect relationship between those two communities, and it's I just feel like it's a little bit piecemeal here in Australia, because we just keep on talking about Friendly Geordies and one or two others. But there must be, I assume there's heaps of folks out there doing good work that are in the influencer bracket that would serve trade unions or the Labor Party or Labor Party candidates or whoever it may be in trying to lift up their campaign or their story. I just wonder if we need to be a little bit more intentional in this work.
Yeah, a little bit, but I would say also obviously there's like these established voices of people who have sort of built followings, but some of the best people in terms of like creating that organic content, like the members themselves, like a lot of unions have engaged in really interesting digital comm strategy or engagement pieces where they identify delegates who often, most union delegates are kind of a bit of a personality themselves. They've got a little bit of charisma. They've got the capacity to tell it how it is, who already have social media followings. I know, for example, the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association has got a whole program, and they do a lot of work with nurses who create really interesting content. And during, most of the year, all that content is just about day in my life in my job and what it's like. And then occasionally when there's a dispute on, they're a very, very powerful voice. And so there is a little bit of that work that's going on. But some of that best content, I think, is done organically by finding your own people in your own sphere of influence rather than necessarily going out and say partnering with someone who's a bit more established, who might already have a bit of a following, but also a bit of an agenda in terms of what they want to be saying to their audiences.
Okay, thanks, Andrew, for those two questions. Now we're going to go to Gus, and he's sort of actually building off the question from Andrew. He says, similar to Andrew, I'm keen to hear a discussion between Lissie and Todd about the Victorian Government's current relationships with the workforce and their unions and navigating the inevitable tensions that occur between the political and the industrial arm of the labour movement. So maybe we can broaden that out to not just Victoria, but also across the country. Lissie, do you want to have a first swing at that one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question, Gus. I think at a high level, I think the Victorian Government has pretty solid relationships with the union movement, and that means that there's a good kind of dialogue, and that both sides, in practice, that means both sides can look at it as a partnership. I think inevitably, it's called bargaining for a reason, and there's some big agreements that are sort of up now. The teachers are expired at the moment. Health Workers Union, there was a strike today, so they're taking protected action, and there's some others coming up in the next sort of 12 months. But I think, generally, I think it's good. But it is maybe I take a step back from that. It is can be quite difficult sometimes. Like the roles, I guess, if you've got a Liberal government, in a bargaining context or just generally with the union movement, the roles are pretty clear and set, right? Like we're on one side and they're on the other side, and we all kind of fight to the death about everything. But when it's a Labor government trying to bargain with its unions, or not even bargaining, but obviously there's lots of policy, debates and issues and disagreements and things that people are trying to work through. And sometimes it can feel a bit personal because, we're all part of the Labor movement, part of the one family, and sometimes it kind of feels like you're having your family fight out on the street in front of everybody, which can be a bit awkward. But I do think there's sometimes a bit of a tendency, and I can say this from the government side, you kind of sometimes it's easy to get into the space where you're a Labor government, you're trying to do good things with the best of intentions, and then you've got a union or multiple unions, against you on something, and you kind of just want to say, we're with you, you're with us. Can't you understand our position? And I'm sure equally, Todd, and you can speak to this more articulately than I can from your experience, but I'm sure it flips back the other way as well. So trying to keep in mind that you've got different responsibilities and they don't always align, and you've got to kind of find your way somewhere to the middle. The difference, I think, being though that with a Labor government, the values are shared and the overall objectives are shared. It's about how far we can go. It's usually how far can we go and how fast and how much at any one time. But, sometimes it can be within the movement and comrade to comrade, it can be a little bit difficult to get these things done amicably, despite everybody's best intentions, I think.
Todd, to you, New South Wales is essentially 6 months behind Victoria on the election timeline, so you're going to have to we'll potentially see this tension bear out in New South Wales as you get closer to the election. And in fact, we've got a question from one of our other listeners, Phase 666. Why people choose the devil's number, I've never understood. What are some of the policies that New South Wales is pushing out currently? But that tension in New South Wales, obviously, there's been some very public stoushes between the current New South Wales Labor government and various affiliated trade unions. How do you see about the managing of that tension between the two wings of our broad movement?
Well, I think, Lissie, I hit it sort of nail on the head, right? There's competing forces or competing interests, and sometimes it's very hard for people to understand the perspective from either side of the bargaining table. There's a line that's thrown around a lot in the movement, which is what the worst day under a Labor government is still better than the best day under a Conservative government. Now, that might very well be true with respect to a whole variety of things, but it doesn't make having an industrial dispute go down any smoother or any easier for anybody. From a union's perspective, like union leadership, from the delegates, the members, there are things that must be solved on behalf of these members. Like there's clearly a problem that they need to go and argue for. And often in a campaign, as said, it's called bargaining for a reason. Like you need to bargain, you need to find a way, and sometimes it means putting up a claim that requires some negotiation position, requires leverage. At the same time, I think we also think that just because Labor gets into government and it goes and occupies the Premier's office, or it goes and occupies the Treasury benches, that suddenly that everything that they want to do, they can just do, that there's no longer any constraints. And that suddenly, particularly I think from union movement, this perspective that once Labor's in government, it can just make money appear, or it can just whip policies into respect. And it goes back to that same conversation we were having before about the need for Labor to also manage conflict and manage the process of government. So really good governments are ones that are able to identify what is it the unions really need, and having that clear dialogue, as well as being able to stage out the conflict or stage out the fight. Now, obviously, we've had a few blues in New South Wales, particularly a couple of late and a few others, but some of that is getting resolved over time. And, the big thing that the union movement campaigned for in New South Wales last election was the removal of the public sector wages cap, a sort of a hard cap on the wages of effectively the heroes of the pandemic. That was a major issue at the last election. Now, the government removed the cap, reinstituted the independent arbiter, and now bargaining can occur. Now, because of the nature of that, there's going to be conflict because we're going to put up a number, government's going to put up a number. There's going to be some difference between those two numbers, and that's why there's an independent arbiter to go away and solve that. Sometimes it feels like to get what we want or what we're going to get is a lot harder, or a lot more difficult than it should be. The other part that I do think is really interesting is, it's always great because when Labor's in opposition, unions and the Labor opposition can work so well together. They're campaigning on issues, they're everything that they are doing is all about raising the prominence of issues which often make a Conservative government look quite poorly. Then when Labor gets into government and the union movement maintains some of those tactics, Labor ministers or Labor MPs suddenly going, well, you're campaigning against me because you want to change my job. Not necessarily. We just want to change your mind. Like, I think there's that thing about putting on the hat of like, you're now the decision maker, and perhaps the Labor governments that do well are the ones that have ministers who understand that they're the decision maker now. They're not just like a target in that respect, because there's a lot more. There's something to be said for recognizing that the tactics are actually about putting pressure on you that's greater than the pressure you must be facing internally because you're taking a position that we don't agree on. So, in the next, I imagine the New South Wales government will start the same process the Victorian government is clearly doing, which is they've got some disputes, they've got some issues outstanding. It would be nice to clear the decks because you want to go into that next election not having to fight a war on two fronts. No Labor government wants to go into an election where it's obviously campaigning against an opposition, a Conservative opposition, but at the same time also having to deal with an unsettled union dispute at a time of great leverage and great opportunity for a campaign. Like, if you're a union who wants to get an outcome, holding out to an election is a really good leverage point.
I'd be interested to get both your thoughts on in terms of where the union movement and the Labor Party's relationship has gone in the last, say, 10, 20, maybe 20 years. I felt like it's got better. And I know that it's probably spikes from time to time. And, Lissie, you just mentioned before, there's a couple of disputes happening in Victoria right now. But geez, and maybe it's changed because I'm not working for a trade union anymore, but I felt like when I was a union organiser, the relationship between the Labor, the trade unions and the Labor Party actually wasn't great. And my feelings were, particularly around state conferences and national conferences, there's a lot of finger pointing going on. Like, the union movement used to say to the Labor Party, you don't represent working people anymore. You've got no members. Your membership base is shrinking. You're out of touch. And the unions, and the Labor Party used to point to the trade union movement going, your membership is shrinking. You're out of touch. You don't have any members anymore. Like, there was a lot of really hurtful things that used to be said about each other. I don't think that happens as much anymore. And I think it's more now just focusing on how the hell can we leverage you in government right now. Like, we helped you get elected. We worked with you to get you into government, and these are the things that we want. And these Labor governments are saying, yes, we completely acknowledge that absolutely you worked hand in hand with us, and we are going to try and meet your demands. However, you need to understand these are the responsibilities we have to the entire state or nation at the same time. And if we can bargain in good faith and like a bunch of adults, then hopefully we can meet your demands. I feel like that's where we are right now. Like, whenever there's a speech on election night when we win, and we win a lot these days, the leader of the party then gets up and actually thanks, the wonderful, amazing trade union movement. I had felt like that never happened when I was younger, when Beazley was losing elections or, when we were going cycling through different leaders. And the other thing I wanted to say, and I'll come to you in a minute, both of you in a minute about that, is also having the privilege to travel overseas and meet Labor and Social Democratic parties overseas, particularly in Europe, but even the United States as well. There really isn't a relationship between the trade union movement and the Labor Party. And I think I've spoken about this on
New Zealand for that matter.
They treat them like a stakeholder. Yeah. Not like a brother or a sister, It's not a family. It's like not even a cousin. It's like you're married to my third cousin kind of relationship, right? And, there's a lot of the European unions. I met with a guy in Paris, and he said, he's high up in one of the biggest trade unions that covers retail workers and hospitality workers and truck drivers, basically like sort of, the Teamsters in the United States. They don't really have a relationship with the Socialist Party or any other party for that matter, and they have no voice in Parliament, and they need one. So, I often sort of think to ourselves, we should remind ourselves how wonderful the relationship is. And at times it's testing, but we can't walk away from each other. We actually must, institutionally remain in lockstep with one another. How that manifests is obviously 50% of the conference floors are made up of trade union officials. Those kind of things has to continue. But also acknowledging, we need to sort of get on with it. But anyway, to my original question, maybe I'll go to you, Lissie, and then maybe to you, Todd. Do you think that the relationship has actually improved over time?
Look, you've been closer to it for longer than I have, but I think if I reflect on say that term that in Victoria we're in opposition, so 10 to 14, and then the time we've been in government since. Like, I think, you know, the unions were an incredibly important part of the campaign that we ran against that Liberal government to get rid of them in one term. They were an intrinsic part of how we put the campaigns together, the way we, you know, the way we got information, the way we found, you know, people to, like real people to kind of stand next to us and say, this is, you know, this is what's happening, this is why it's bad, this is what, you know, affects Victorians, and this is why you should change the government. And then that also meant that we had a big, because of that those relationships, we had a big platform of stuff that we committed to do as part of our platform, that we then kind of spent that, you know, that initial part of the government delivering. So there was, I guess, there were a lot of things we'd agreed were our part of our shared agenda that we then kind of got on and did. It's not that there wasn't, you know, any points of conflict. I'm sure anyone with a reasonable memory can come up with a couple of big ones, but there like just a lot of proximity and a lot of dialogue, and I think a genuine view that, you know, we all got here together, and so we had to keep doing that work together from our respective responsibilities. I think the longer, it's kind of like anything, the longer you're in government, the more stuff you kind of accumulate and the more decisions you have to kind of carry. So I think sometimes that can get a bit hard as well. But yeah, I mean, I think the relationship, at least in Victoria, I think is good. And like I 100% agree, Stephen, like having had the opportunity in the last 12 months to go and talk to, you know, political kind of people in other countries, it's probably reinforced a bit for me as well, like how important it is, but how unusual, sadly, it is that we are a proper Labor Party that has its roots in the Labor movement, and that provides us with a grounding and like a kind of proper enduring foundation that I think there are other parties that they either don't have, they've never had it, or they've lost it. And I think it really hurts. I think it hurts them in both in putting together an agenda, but also in trying to work out, like, who are they for, and what is, like, what are we all doing here? So yeah, I think the relationship is good. It takes work to stay that way. I'm interested, Todd, if you think that sort of holds in New South Wales. I mean, we talked already about the feds and all the stuff they've done in the last few years, so I think it's fair to say it's in pretty good nick there too.
I mean, I only make the point that, like, obviously the union movement's no monolith, right? There are always going to be parts of the movement that have got a dispute ongoing and have an issue, and they're, you know, there's a diversity of members, as we are at one point more than 1 million members across the country. They're not all going to be happy with the government at any given time or the party. But I do think the relationship is in a much better place. And for me, one of the barometers, when I first started getting involved in the Labor Party, particularly in New South Wales, things were in a pretty dire straits. I think my first election campaign was the 2011 New South Wales state election, which did not go well for the Labor government or Labor Party. I don't think there were a lot of unions that campaigned at that time. But I remember in the kind of the aftermath of that and sort of the post-2013 defeat of the federal government, you know, every time we have one of these big losses over a period, there's a lot of reform chat. There's a lot of reform talk. There's a lot of dusting. There's a lot of, you know, 180-page books produced by former front benchers of their hot takes that are, you know, and almost always one of the ideas is we've got to distance ourselves from the union movement. And that was like always one of the reforms. Like we've got to strip the conference floor. They don't represent, you know, like we'll only ever be a modern Labor Party. The fact that I just cannot imagine anyone saying that in this modern era right now about the relationship between the government and the union movement, like, to say that, I think in Victoria and I know in New South Wales or nationally would be seen as like not just like a very old-fashioned view about reform, because there were much better ideas that actually came out of a lot of those processes, and we're a better party for going through all that reform chat. But, you know, you wouldn't be talking about distancing ourselves from one of the, you know, this network of 1 million people who provide the Labor Party of the day with very good connections with working class people and what is in their interests and what do they believe in, but also their resources during a campaign and their ability to support them, and them as a third party campaigner. But, you know, I can't see any serious campaign strategists actually suggesting that those two should be de-linked in any way. And from a more broader point, you look around the world, you can see the absolute evidence of what happens when a centre-left or a socially democratic party decides that the collective representation of working people isn't worth a seat on the floor. What ends up happening to their policies? So to me, that's my barometer. That being said, as far as I know, it's in a better state. That being said, there's always disputes going on at some point.
Just talking about party reform, then Todd, and reviews, just made me think: how bad is the Liberal Party federal report on the election that they can't release it, and there's a potential legal action between the former leader and the party? Oh man, I always want to read them anyway when they lose, but now I really want to read it. But I want the uncut one.
There are a few things on the earth I would not. Okay. Oh yeah, yeah. I don't know what on the earth I wouldn't do to get my hands on that report. And I know. I was told the other day there's a guy I used to do some stew poll with who was in the Young Libs who listens to this podcast. If you are listening, you need to get me a copy of this report.
And we will talk about it. And we will be fair.
And I promise we will edit your voice so that no one will hear you. And you can give us your fresh hot takes.
This is a safe space.
Yeah, it's a safe space. Give us that report.
To all those people listening in right now for opposition research.
Yeah. If you have a copy of that report, we promise to read it out line for line.
Absolutely. We will promote your own internal agenda.
Yes. If you are a moderate Liberal out there right now trying to character assassinate Peter Dutton's legacy, send it to us.
Yeah, we're your friend. Anyway, as the Greens put out theirs, probably titled It Wasn't Our Fault, and here are all the people we want to blame. Okay, let's go to our last question before we close out today's mailbag episode. It's from Rosie Elliott, and she says, it's great to have this chat. I'd like to know why the ALP website, state and national, are so terrible. As we all know, in brackets, maybe get someone who can think about this. I must admit, I hadn't been on any of our ALP state or national websites for a while until Rosie directed us to it. Todd, I think you did a bit of research on this first of all. Can I get your thoughts on? I might broaden the question out a bit to kind of like, what role do websites play anymore in terms of what's its purpose? I've never completely understood. They've changed so much in years gone by. There used to be so much detail on websites, and now they're kind of like holding pages to direct you to get offline. But what did you make of our websites? Is Rosie a bit too harsh in terms of how good they are?
I'd say there's mixed reviews, but with them, and I having now completed my extensive desktop research of the websites today. I mean, there is a question to be asked about what is the role of a sort of a party website beyond, what do you want your Labor Party website to have other than a way to join the party, a way to sign a petition so we can do list out like the sort of get yourself on a digital journey towards taking offline action or field action, probably a role to donate, party platform if you want to get some information. But beyond that, there's not a huge lot of value in them because so much of how people now engage with politics in an online setting is through social media and through other forms of digital, like through you receiving emails from the party or from you watching a video explaining or a clipping from a press release, from a press conference, or listening to a pro-Labor podcast produced by yours truly, Stephen Donnelly. Like those are the ways people are now engaging in this. So like the website as a tool is probably diminishing in value. That being said, I reckon the South Australian Labor Party has done a cracking job on their website. It's got strong representations of Malinaskis. I think that's a key characteristic. And the New South Wales Labor website's also pretty good for my comrades here in Sydney. But yeah, they're probably not the best in that sense, but I don't know if they need to do much more. And I think there is a lot of money, a lot of resources the party is investing in digital, but I don't think it's in website is where that focus is.
You would want the South Australian one to be half decent. They've got an election in a couple of months' time.
It looks pretty fresh too. I reckon it's just gone through a bit of a reboot, but I'll have to go confirm that. If Social Democratic wants to send me around the country to do a more extensive review of the websites, I'm happy to go on said junket.
Maybe we can get a sponsor to help with that little journey. Lissie, what are your thoughts on websites for political purposes and communication?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. Like if they're static, right? And that's not where most people are getting information. I will say though, maybe this is more an internal thing than a kind of voter thing, but as someone who for the entire time I worked in and around the party has never been able to remember where I filed things like the party rules or the party platform or whatever on my computer, being able to just kind of go there and find them all very quickly is helpful. So I appreciate, and I'll give Vic Labour a shout out for having a page for that stuff as well.
We need that a lot.
Indeed.
The party rules.
We do. That's right.
Constantly needing to source the party rules for various disputes.
Frequently visited things. I will say, actually, Vic Labour has done that. They've actually, I think it was last year, someone will correct me if that's wrong, but they did launch a kind of membership portal which makes it a little bit easier to, keep track of whether you've renewed properly and, all those sorts of things, which when they're entirely kind of manual processes is not always necessarily the best way to kind of manage things. So I think they've put a bit of South Australia may be the prettiest. That's fine. But with membership portal here in Victoria, so good for us. I don't know. I mean, I'd be interested, I guess, and maybe people can leave this in the comments for us, but like what else are you looking for that isn't here? Like there's basic policy information on, I haven't done the full suite like Todd has, but the basic policy information on most of them, you can donate, you can join. They all seem to have the kind of basic, 101 resources for, rules and that sort of stuff. Like what else do we need would be my question. You can make stylistic judgments. I'm all for that.
And the upkeep of it as well. That's the other thing that is a pain in the ass.
It's a whole resource, right? Of someone who can otherwise be creating content for socials or, being an organizer or doing something else.
Yeah. Well, maybe Rosie's good at doing websites. Maybe if she wants to let us know and we can point her in the right direction to give some of our branches a bit of a hand with their website development, then have at it. Rosie, thank you so much for your question, and thank you to everyone else for your mailbag questions for this month. Really do greatly appreciate that. Don't forget, if you do want to contribute to our mailbag episode, then you need to be a member of our Patreon community. You can just click on the link in the show notes and come and join. It's a great little space for us to have a bit of a chat. Even outside of the mailbag episodes, there's always a bit of a discussion about what's going on in terms of the party and the role of the podcast. Can help sort of facilitate that conversation. So we encourage you to subscribe and just help support the show. To our two monthly guests, Lissie Ratcliff and Todd Pinkerton, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
And to everyone else, thanks for listening. And we'll be back next week with an episode which is also known as The Feeney Files with Jesse McCrone. Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.